Good afternoon, folks, or time-appropriate greetings to wherever you are. This is Philosophy Roulette, number 45, where we grab a random philosophy paper and read and review it. This morning I did a British Journal of Aesthetics paper. It was on, what was that on? Let's see, it's still here somewhere. Does artistic value pose a special problem with time travel theories? And the author said no. But let's do something from a different journal then. Let's not do complexity. I don't want to read anything that complex. Criminal law and philosophy. Let's go find out if they have something cool. There's an introductory article. Let's see. In memoriam, a review. Okay, nothing short. Everything's too long for, I don't want to be reading for an hour and a half. It has happened before. I had to break it up into like multiple sessions and I just couldn't take it after a while. Okay, this is short. Let's see. The compatibility of differential equations and causal models reconsidered. Again, I don't want to be reading a ton of formulas, so I can't really do that. Horizontal surgicality and mechanistic constitution, mind-brain dichotomy, mental disorder, and theory of mind. Well, these are exciting. We'll get to do one of these. Why intentionalism cannot explain phenomenal character. Alright, whatever. So this is 13 pages, and this is 14 pages. So let's look at the 13-page one first, if it's available. Come on, Beate and Michael. Yes. Wait. Okay, fill archive. I was like fill papers. Yeah, so okay, so in other words, it is on your website, but they did not somehow cross-list it? Okay, whatever. I got it. So. This is I think the first time I've had a 3-author paper. I had a paper done by some huge number of authors. It was a experimental philosophy, and tested languages across the world for certain characteristics, and so that was kind of interesting. I've never seen a philosophy article with that many authors, but hey. Oh no! What happened to Firefox? Shucks. Well, whatevers. I'm sorry about that. I swear it was there earlier. I don't know what happened. Okay, but it doesn't matter. This is the paper for now. Horizontal surgicality and mechanistic constitution. I have no idea what I'm about to read, and that doesn't matter. So, no abstract. We're not abstracting. The mechanistic view of explanation, which has gained considerable popularity in philosophy of the special sciences, holds that the upper or macro level behavior of type psi of a system S is explained by the lower or micro level mechanism type constituting psiing. So some sort of supervenience explanation-y grounding thing so far. Thus, constitution is the key dependence relation in mechanistic explanations. Okay, so constitution is the dependence relation, not a grounding relation. This constitution had a bunch of grounding stuff not too long ago. Even though constitution is commonly understood as a non-causal dependence relation, the best-known theory of constitution is Kramer's mutual manipulability theory, MM defines it by drawing heavily on conceptual resources that have proven valuable in analyzing causation, more precisely Woodward's notion of an ideal intervention. In short, an ideal intervention surgically fixes the value of exactly one target variable such that all of its other effects, if any, in a scrutinized system are mediated by this target. Against this background, MM, the mutual manipulability theory, stipulates that the behavior of phi of a spatiotemporal part X of S, or synonymously, is constitutively relevant to S's psiing if and only if there exists a possible ideal intervention of X's phiing that changes S's psiing, and a possible ideal intervention on S's psiing that changes X's phiing. Okay, so this is some sort of this is a supervenience of some kind. It's got different properties, but it's a theory of constitution where, I mean, this is the thing. It's constitutes where there's an intervention, an ideal intervention. So, but it's the same sort of thing where X's phiing changes S's psiing. So there's something X, which is the underlying thing, that has to change if the bigger thing S changes. So it's a sort of it's a supervenience like thing here, where the bigger thing at the part X of S. So X of S. So this, the X of S, X has to change when S does, because if S changes, then X does, because X is constitutive of S. Okay, a lot of fun things to say today. Although MM has much intuitive appeal and is still popular in the literature, see all these people, it has recently become clear that it suffers from decisive problems. Most importantly, by definitionally tying constitution to the possible existence of ideal interventions, MM either reduces constitution to causation, in violation of the widespread view that constitution is a non-causal view of dependence, or entails that cases of constitution cannot possibly exist, for the ideal interventions required by MM are unrealizable in principle. In our view, this conclusivity establishes that MM is not suited for defining constitution. The question remains, however, whether this finding merely invalidates MM's attempt to spell out constitution in terms of ideal interventions, or whether it furthermore entails the impossibility of analyzing constitution in terms of non-ideal interventions. Some authors have considered the problem encountered by MM sufficient to abandon the attempt of spelling out constitution in interventionist terms altogether, and consequently have proposed alternative analyses with alternative methods of constitutional discovery. This paper, by contrast, takes a different approach. We explore the possibility of maintaining the original idea of accounting for constitution on interventionist grounds by developing a notion of a non-ideal intervention that, on the one hand, avoids the problem of MM, and on the other still provides sufficient leverage for inferences to constitution. Okie dokie. We'll find out how. As our starting point, we take recent results by Romero, Baumgartner, Gebhardt, and Baumgartner and Casini, who have shown that the upper and lower levels of mechanism can only be manipulated via common causes. As a consequence, all interventions that possibly are constitutionally revealing are not surgical but fat-handed. Okay. Okay, so because things need to be able to upper and lower levels of you can't get fine-grained control because all the levels have to be manipulated via common causes. Okay, interesting. Without further restrictions, however, fat-handed interventions systematically underdetermine the inferences to constitution. To avoid this underdetermination problem and render unambiguous inferences to constitute possible, we develop an additional constraint that fat-handed interventions on mechanistic systems must satisfy, viz. horizontal surgicality. Roughly, fat-handed interventions are horizontally surgical if they are surgical relative to every level on which they operate. That is, if they surgically target one variable on every level on which they operate, such that the target constituents and the target phenomenon change their values simultaneously. We shall argue that under the additional assumption that all changes in the upper level phenomena are necessarily realized by a change in some lower level constituent or other, a single fat-handed horizontally surgical intervention can conclusively establish that its lower level target constitutes its upper level target. So it has to hit on multiple levels all at once is basically what's going on. That or it somehow changes relative to what it's doing, which would be kind of interesting also. But I can sort of buy that multiple things are happening at once in causation. Or, well, maybe that's not reasonable at all. I don't know. Let's find out. It is then tempting to stipulate that this sufficient condition is the existence of a change in the phenomenon under horizontal surgical intervention on a part is also unnecessary for constitution, and hence to turn it into a full-blown definition of constitution. In the same way, the interventionist theory of causation stipulates the existence of a change in a putative effect under an ideal intervention on a putative cause is not only sufficient but also necessary for causation. While an in-depth discussion of this proposal is beyond the scope of this paper, we conclude that the general project of using interventions to analyze constitution still holds promise. This paper is structured as follows. Section 2 introduces the features of constitution and the metaphysical principles we need for our proposal. Section 3 motivates and defines horizontal surgicality, whose use for analyzing constitution is then discussed in Section 4. Preliminaries. You know what, I wonder if I can zoom in on this. I don't know if you guys are getting a good shot. There we go. Constitution is a dependence relation characterized by a number of features and principles that many authors explicitly or implicitly endorse. In what follows, we render transparent the features and principles that will be relevant for our subsequent argument. First, constitution relates upper level phenomena and their lower level constituents, both of which are types of behavior exhibited by specific entities on upper and lower levels, respectively. We represent such behaviors by specific variables as introduced by Spohn. Specific variables represent behaviors of specific entities. Ooh, a picture. Embedded in a specific mechanistic concept. For example, behaviors of specific transistors contained in specific amplifiers, or of specific neurons contained in specific brains, etc. More concretely, we use capital Psi to stand for the behavior of interest of the upper level entity S. Since each lower level entity can perform many behaviors, we need a notion that allows us to express this entity and behavior relativity at once. Hence, we've got phi AM and phi Bn shall denote the behavior of type Mn of lower level entities X of A, X of B, etc. For the reader to remember, entity is the top variable, behavior is the bottom variable. So in general, psi with the K is the entity, I is the behavior, is equal to J, indicate that the fact that some entity XK where K ranges over the various entities contained in S, exhibits some behavior phi of I, where I ranges over possible activities in some particular token J, where J ranges over the possible token values of capital Psi of I. That's awesome! To denote behaviors of entities SK outside of a mechanistic system, we use other Greek letters capital Alpha, Beta, Gamma, with K's and I's, etc. Okay. For convenience, we moreover define the constituting set of bold capital Phi of a phenomenon Psi to be the set of all and only constituents responsible for Psi, relative to their mechanistic, spatial, temporal, and causal contexts. To illustrate, Figure 1 depicts a mechanistic system where we assume for simplicity that every entity part exhibits only one behavior. The phenomena psi in the upper level ellipse contains 4 behaviors, and in the lower level contains 4 behaviors in the lower level ellipse. Wait, the phenomena psi in the upper level ellipse contains 4 behaviors in the lower level ellipse. Okay, so this upper level ellipse has these 4 lower level behaviors. Okay. Where'd we go? Okay. only two of them, viz. Psi 1, Psi 2, are constitutive of Psi. So there's only two. Wait, there's only two of them that matter, though? Okay, so two of them constitute this, but four things are going on, but only 1 and 2 actually matter for big Psi. Okay. The abstract structure can, for instance, be interpreted in terms of the mechanism underlying the amplification phenomena existed by a two-stage serial amplifier. In a two-stage amplifier, a voltage difference is applied to a first transistor, which amplifies the signal and feeds it to a second transistor, which also amplifies the signal and outputs it to some other device, say a loudspeaker. In the principle, the overall gain is the sum of the individual gain of the two transistors. Moreover, each transistor produces heat, which may require heat sinks in order to prevent overheating. The signal subject to amplification is a complex wave made up of many different frequencies and amplitudes. Depending on the kind and position of the circuit's elements, the amplifier may introduce an audible distortion of the signal's waveform. Against that background, we may interpret sigma in figure 1 as the voltage difference applied to the amplifier. Psi is the overall gain of the amplifier, and gamma the audible distortion. Psi 1 and 2 are the individual gains of the first and second transistor. The amplifier also features behaviors that are constitutively irrelevant to its gain, that is, the behavior Psi 3 of the heatsink of the first transistor and behavior Psi 4 of a malfunctioning heatsink, which is physically and thus causally detached from the second transistor. Okay, so we've got like a little toy model here of an amplifier, and it's going to be analyzed mechanistically because, well, that's what the paper's about. And so I guess the whole point is to get clear on the details that we got going here. Second, as is common for the mechanistic literature, we will henceforth assume clarity on the spatiotemporal parthood relations obtaining among the analyzed behaviors. That is, in particular, for any two behavior instances, psi hi equals I and psi ki equals j. Why do you have to reuse i's here? Come on. Relative to some phenomenon of interest, psi equals L, it is clear whether the states I and j stand in relation of proper parthood, meaning that one of I and j occupies a smaller spacetime region than the other and is contained in the spacetime region occupied by the other. In the vein of Urinen, we define psi phi ki equals j to be a direct proper part of psi equals L if and only if j is a proper part of L, and there does not exist another behavior, phi hi of I equals I contained in psi equals L, such that j is a proper part of I. Okay, fine. It's just things that you think are parts because this is straightforward. Meant to be straightforward. This gives us a hierarchy of direct proper parthood, which can be used to locally distinguish spatio-temporal levels of psi. Psi is on the top level. The variables represent direct proper parts of psi are on the next lower level, and then come the variables representing direct proper parts of the direct proper parts of psi, and so on. Against that background, the relation between a phenomenon psi and its constituents phi can be more specifically characterized by the following parthood principle. An instance of the elements of phi are spatiotemporal parts of instances of psi, that is, the spatiotemporal region occupied by an instance of the phenomenon contains the spatiotemporal region occupied by instances of the constituents. Yeah. Those elements phi that represent the parts of psi constitute psi on the first lower level. Those representing direct parts of the first level constituents are second level constituents, and those representing direct parts of the second level constituents are third level constituents, and so forth. Third, the relation between a phenomenon and its constituents is to be analyzed in terms of non-reductive supervenience. Okay, so here's where the supervenience finally pops up its evil head. More specifically, a phenomenon psi supervenes on phi, meaning that every change in psi is necessarily accompanied by changing at least one phi ki and an element of phi relative to a given mechanistic context, such that due to multiple realizability, the phenomenon is not reducible, in part not identical to its constituents. So at least something underneath has to change for there to be a higher level thing. Something underneath has to change also, though it's not necessarily the same thing every time, because it can be the higher level phenomenon can be multiply realized by something over here, something over there, whatever. Moreover, changes in psi and its supervenes base occur simultaneously. Okay, fine. We assume that phenomena can, in principle, be constitutionally explained on any of their lower levels. That, in turn, presupposes that there exist constituents of a phenomenon on every lower level, meaning that there are no gaps in constitutional hierarchies. I mean, I wonder what the bottom level is then, but whatever. You don't need to get to the bottom level for this sort of stuff, I don't think. We combine these features of constitution into a principle we call universal constitution. Every change in a state of any non-fundamental phenomenon psi is necessarily and simultaneously realized by a change in the state of at least one constitutive phi ki of psi on every lower level, such that phi is not equal to psi ki. Psi is not equal to phi ki. It follows from you see that free-floating spatiotemporal phenomena which are not constitutively anchored or grounded are impossible, with the exception of phenomena on a bottom fundamental level, if such a level exists. That's my slight worry. I don't think that matters to anyone here. Finally, we assume simultaneity. Simultaneous change cannot be causally related. Okay. So, this is their horizontality sneaking in right here. Because if you have something on two different levels and you have to causally change them, it has to be not this one doesn't cause this one. They have to be, if they're simultaneous, they have to happen at the same time. So, actually, I don't know. Let's see. Well, I'm not exactly sure on that, but I think they're going to have to change everything all at once. And so it's not like something on the lower level is causing something on a higher level. It's that the horizontality is causing everything at once. So, but we'll see. It has been argued by Craver and Bechdel, sim, in combination, sim is simultaneous, cannot be causally related, in combination with the fact that changes in phenomena and constituents are simultaneous, which follows from UC, entails that constitution is a non-causal form of dependence. Causation relates mereologically independent entities, such that causes temporally precedes their effects. Yeah, because a cause has to do something in time to have an effect. Otherwise, it would all be the same thing if it was all immediate. In contrast, constitution holds among wholes and their parts, that is, among spatio-temporally overlapping entities, such that changes in phenomena necessarily co-occur with changes in their constituents, and thus cannot, Pakshay Luridin, be causally related to them. Sim and UC entail systematic fat-handedness. Phenomena and their constituents can only be manipulated with a fat hand, that is, via common causes. To see this, suppose that sigma is a cause of a phenomena psi. By supervenience, all changes sigma induced on psi are necessarily associated with changes in at least one constituent, phi ki, element of all the stuff phi, meaning that sigma is not only makes a difference to psi, but also to phi ki. Entity k and thingy act I believe it was. Entity and, well, let me just remind myself what the exact terminology was here, because terminology matters. The behavior, they're calling it. It's calling the behavior. I don't know if that's a great idea, but we're going to stick with it. Okay. So, yeah. Alright. Okay. It follows from difference-making theories of causation, of which Woodward's interventionism is the most prominent exemplar, that sigma not only causes psi, but also the behavior of k, the behavior I of k, entity k, psi, meaning there's at least one causal path from sigma to psi and phi ki. For mere logical reasons, this can be structurally realized in one of two ways. Either sigma causes psi and phi ki along one causal path. For example, sigma, psi, phi ki are more than one path, and then so you got sigma pointing to psi and sigma also pointing to phi ki, but not then the psi also pointing to, well, maybe you could have psi pointing to phi ki. Okay. The former options excluded by the fact that changes in psi ki are simultaneous. Yeah, this would be some sort of causation up here. And their relationship hence is non-causal. In light of the non-identity of phenomena and their parts in the standard definition of direct causal paths in terms of ordered n tuples of variables, it follows that sigma causes psi and phi ki along two different paths. So we've got sigma psi and sigma phi ki with psi not equaling phi ki, meaning that sigma is a common cause of psi and phi ki. This argument, of course, generalizes every cause of a phenomenon is also a cause of some constituent or other of that phenomenon on a different causal path. Technical reading. I like technical stuff, but like reading it out loud. There is something to be said about how these things get written. When you're looking at things on a page, you can do more. Well, it's the same problem like in theater versus a book, or a movie versus a book, I should say. You can show multiple things at once on a movie screen. In a book, you have to do everything sequentially. And so, like, when you're reading this stuff, you can just skim right over this because you can see the different variables here, like across the page. When you're reading it, you have to go very sequentially. Of course, you can get a lot more information in when reading, and that's why movies are always cutting stuff out. You can't describe someone's thoughts without like a monologue, but that takes forever in a movie. So, but like this sort of stuff, just philosophically, how does all this stuff get compressed into a philosophical idea and come across is non-trivial issue, actually, I think. Yeah. Anyway, now that I have decompressed for a second, let's continue. In light of systematic fat-handedness, the ultimate deficiency of MM is easily pinpointed. MM deficiently ties the notion of constitution to the possibility of ideal interventions that they target one level of a mechanistic system and thereby change the other level, where in fact it is only possible to induce change on upper and lower levels of a mechanism by fat-handedly targeting both levels on different causal paths. Contrapositively put, whenever ideal interventions that target a first variable and induce a change in a second one are possible, these variables are not linked in terms of constitution but in terms of causation, as is duly entailed by the interventionist theory of causation. The obvious conclusion to draw is that constitution must not be analyzed in terms of ideal interventions. In what follows, we develop a weakened notion of intervention based on which we will first provide a sufficient condition for constitution, and then, in section 4, reconsider the possibility of a full-blown interventionist definition of constitution. On the one hand, systematic fat-handedness suggests that in order to be able to intervene on mechanistic systems, some common cause must pass as interventions. On the other hand, as fat-handed interventions generate confounded data and thus come with greatly diminished inferential leverage, there are good methodological reasons not to admit all common causes into the category of potential interventions. In fact, methodological prudence calls for maximal restrictiveness in assigning the status of an intervention to common causes. Prompted by problems of the original versions of interventionism with macro-to-micro causation, Woodward has recently weakened his original notion of an ideal intervention by introducing exemption causes for supervenience relations. While he required in 2003 that an intervention targets exactly one variable, he now, in 2015, some 12 years later I guess, allows for multiple targets provided that these targets are related in terms of supervenience. Woodward contends that an intervention on a macro variable psi should should be treated as automatically changing, indeed as also an intervention on the supervenience base as b psi of psi. Thus, adjusted to their symbolism, fine. Thus, if phenomena and their constituents are related by supervenience, as is standardly assumed in mechanistic theorizing, and as we assume for the purpose of this papers, as a mistake, CF is compare, not. You just say C section 2, not CF. CF is compare for contrast. Interventions that target, I know, but everyone uses it nowadays, but the Latin's wrong. Interventions that target both, and not that I know Latin, but I just know, this is just something I know. Interventions that target both phenomena and constituents on different causal paths pass as interventions, notwithstanding the fact that they are non-surgical but fat-handed. For brevity, we will speak of permissibly fat-handed interventions. The notion of a permissibly fat-handed intervention imposes a far-reaching restriction on common causes to pass as interventions. Common causes whose parallel effect are not related by some residual dependence, as is the case for most common causes, do not count as interventions. Okay. Residual dependence. What the heck is that? Only common causes with parallel effects that are related in terms of supervenience can figure as interventions. Okay. So the interventions that all supervene on each other. So you've got some sort of supervenience on both sides. You've got supervenience on the thing that's being affected and supervenience on the causal side. So, and the superveniences in some sense are going to have to line up. So we've got two different mechanistic systems that have supervenience relations, and then the things that are supervening on each other all interact on corresponding levels. Okay. As phenomena and their constituents stand in a supervenience relation, their common causes pass as permissibly fat-handed interventions. It follows that against the background of Woodward's weakened notion of an intervention, mutually manipulability of macro and micro levels is no longer ruled out for merely conceptual reasons. Let us thus ask whether it is possible to get an adequate account of constitution by simply replacing MM's ideal intervention with permissibly fat-handed interventions in the following vein. P-fat, phi of Ki constitutes psi if and only if the instants of phi Ki are spatiotemporally parts of instants of psi. There exists possible permissible fat-handed intervention I of psi Ki is capital I is equal to small I on phi Ki with respect to psi that causes psi phi Ki equals J for some J simultaneously changes psi. Okay, there also exists permissibly fat-handed interventions of I of psi equals J on psi with respect to phi Ki that causes psi equals L for some L simultaneously changes psi of Ki. So basically these two things here are, you see, like they've switched the variables around. So again, they sort of match up is what's going on in their intervention. The intervention on both sides somehow has to match up for the fat-handedness. So the part of the hand that's doing all the work, this little part here is pushing on the other part, and that little part there has to match up on this, and then so this hand is pushing on this hand, but the smaller parts also have to line up with the smaller parts in this hand that are also feeling the force. Oh, unfortunately this doesn't work. The question must be answered in negative as P-fat is question begging. Yes, well, that's okay. Well, maybe not. Whether some common cause I of psi and phi Ki counts as permissibly fat-handed intervention depends on whether phi Ki belongs to the supervenience base of psi, which in turn depends on whether phi Ki is a constituent of psi. That I is a permissibly fat-handed intervention on psi and phi Ki presupposes rather than establishes that phi Ki is a constituent of psi. Yeah, but I thought you kind of were assuming that that's how you set things up, was so that psi Ki was a constituent of phi Ki was a constituent of psi. Okay, well, I'm sure they're going to correct this now. This problem, of course, generalizes to any other attempt to define constituents on the basis of permissibly fat-handed interventions. Yeah, but I thought that's what you were trying to do. Whatever. The notion of a permissibly fat-handed intervention presupposes clarity on the supervenience relations among the variable in a scrutinized. Yes, I did actually mention that before. How are you going to actually line up the supervenience relations? By contrast, the theory of constitution aims to provide such clarity by identifying the micro constituents forming the supervenience base of the macro variables. Okay, so that's a further problem. But okay. In light of the uninformativeness of P-fat, it might be suggested that a qualification of the notion of fat-handedness intervention is redundant because it is possible to account for constitution on the basis of fat-handed interventions to occur. However, it is easily seen that a theory that recognizes all common causes as potential interventions and disregards the italicized qualifications in P-fat, let's call this theory fat, is a non-starter. The mere existence of common causes of upper and lower level of mechanism is insufficient to distinguish between constituting and non-constituting parts. Just like constituting parts, non-constituting parts may share common causes with the phenomenon. Okay, fair enough. So I was obviously choosing which parts of my hands were pushing up against each other, but they're saying, look, that's because you already knew what the parts were. We're trying to explain which parts are doing the work on the multi-level causation here. So they want to do more than just sort of make a coherent theory. They actually want to non-beg the question, explain lining up supervenience. Okay, so let's see how they do that. For example, consider the mechanism in figure 1, in which the lower level variable psi3 represents the behavior of the functioning heatsink of the first transistor. Phi3 is an effect of the constituent phi1, but does not itself constitute the phenomenon psi. The heat sink's behavior is, using Craver's jargon, a sterile effect of the mechanism underlying the amplification, that is, a downstream effect of a constituent that plays no role in the bottom level realization of the phenomenon. As phi3's direct causal parent, phi1 and psi are systematically coupled via common causes in the structure of figure 1, phi3 and psi are likewise share a multitude of common causes, which in turn yields that many changes in the former will be associated with changes in the latter. For instance, inducing a voltage difference causes heat to be transferred to the sink and causes the amplification, and conversely, stopping the voltage difference terminates both the heating and the amplification. Nonetheless, of course, the heat sink's behavior is not a constituent of the mechanism for amplification. The reason is that the influence of the common cause of amplification and the heat sink's behavior is mediated via another spatiotemporal part of the amplifier, namely the first transistor's behavior, which is a constituent of amplification. This example shows that only simultaneous changes in parts and phenomena are revealing of constitution. Okay. Moreover, consider the lower level variable phi4, which represents the behavior of the malfunctioning heatsink disconnected from the mechanism. A hammer can smash both the heatsink and, say, the first transistor, and as a result of this change amplification phenomenon, but clearly the existence of a common cause, a fat-handed intervention of the disconnected heatsink's behavior and the amplification does not entail the former as a constituent of the latter. The reason is that the cause is ham-fisted on the lower level. Too many hands and ham-fisted here. As not only crashes the disconnected part, but also the first behavior, whose behavior phi1 is a constituent of amplification. That is, the intervention that is revealing of the constitution must not directly target multiple parts of a scrutinized phenomenon on the same level. Yeah. Still, constitutionally revealing fat-handed interventions on mechanistic systems need not be surgical with respect to all parts of the phenomenon phi on all levels. Yeah, so to understand which parts are lining up, you have to somehow get closer, but they're saying you don't have to be surgical with all parts at all times, at all levels. You have to sort of have the right phenomenon in mind to understand the fine-grainedness of what you're talking about. So let's see. As parthood allows for mereological hierarchies, parts of psi can be parts of other parts of psi on other levels, since causes inducing changes on spatiotemporally overlapping processes are common causes of the process, and thus non-surgical. Every intervention on psi is a common cause of psi, and at least one of its parts, phi ki, on the first lower level, and at least one of phi ki's parts on a second lower level, and so on. Moreover, by UC, some of these changes will be necessary, such that any intervention on psi necessarily targets on different causal paths a multitude of psi's parts on all lower levels. A horizontally surgical intervention I, phi ki, on phi ki with respect to psi must thus be defined in such a way that big I, phi ki, is allowed to cause changes on multiple parts of psi, provided that big I, phi ki, does not directly target more than one part of psi on every lower level. So it has to target the relevant part for the phenomena at hand on that intervention. In sum, fat-handed interventions without further qualifications are insufficient to infer constitution. Baumgartner and Casini have recently proposed an abductive theory of constitution based on fat-handed interventions, which, without making use of simultaneity, aims to compensate for the shortcomings of fat. On the one hand, they find that by gradually expanding analyzed variable sets, it becomes possible to identify sterile effects and disconnected parts on interventions grounds, but on the other, they show that unrestricted fat-handed interventions never ground a conclusive inference to constitution. In this paper, we take a different approach. We impose a further restriction on fat-handed interventions, that is horizontal surgicality, to turn them into constitutionally revealing tools. More specifically, based on above considerations, we propose the following definition of horizontal surgical intervention. H. Big I, phi ki is a horizontally surgical intervention variable on part phi ki of psi with respect to psi, if and only I. The big intervention I, phi ki, is a cause of phi ki. If the intervention causes change in both phi ki and psi, these changes, if they cause change at the lower and total macro level simultaneously, and if big I, phi ki, the intervention is a direct cause of at most one behavior on every lower level than size. I'm a little confused actually. What at most one behavior? How do you quantify over behaviors on this thing here? Because it's easy when you have you only identified 2 heat sinks or like a few different objects, but I'm not entirely certain what one behavior in this scheme actually comes to. So you have to have the particular causal, the particular constitutive parts of psi at the next level down for that behavior. For that macro behavior, but what exactly on the lower level constitutes behavior? Because if these things can be multiply realized, it may not be so clear as to what that underlying behavior that is being targeted actually is. So I'm not entirely certain that the challenge from above, where you had the supervenient, the problem from not understanding what is supervening on what, that you actually got that here, because calling it at most one behavior doesn't actually mean you can identify that behavior. I mean, are you falling into the problem of these folks up here? Because the quantifier of one behavior is ambiguous or somehow vague or something. We shall say that, continuing, we shall say that I, phi ki, is horizontally surgical intervention, a proper part phi ki of psi with respect to psi, if and only if phi ki equals I fixes psi ki to some value j, such that it simultaneously changes the value of psi and directly changes at most one behavior on every level lower than psi's. Yeah, see, it fixes the value, and then it changes at most one behavior on every level. So this is exactly the problem. To do that, you need to have very clear understanding of behaviors and levels, which in some sense may again be begging the question if you can actually do that, and so it may not have escaped the above problem of question begging this. But I don't know, but this seems like one behavior on every level. This worries me, because I don't know exactly how you quantify over behaviors and levels, I mean, except in obvious cases. I mean, in the diagram above, it's obvious because you set it up that way. But if you're like a biological system, it might not have such clear levels as you're going through the different systems. The next section will show that fat-handed interventions on a mechanistic system that are horizontally surgical in this sense are indeed revealing of constitution. Mechanistic constitution. We claim that for a part psi of phi ki of a phenomenon psi constitutes psi for each phi ki belong to the set phi of psi's constituents. It suffices that the following condition be satisfied. Sufficiency condition. There is a possible horizontal surgical intervention I phi ki equals little I on phi ki with respect to psi that causes changes in both phi ki and psi. For the ensuing proof of sufficiency, sufficiency is indeed sufficient for constitution we need, in addition to the principle introduced in section 2, a principle of transitivity about the co-occurrence of events and non-relativistic distances. Transitivity of X co-occurs with Y and Y co-occurs with Z, and then X co-occurs with Z. The proof can be intuitively motivated as follows. Since every higher level phenomenon is constituted by some behavior on every lower level, any intervention on that changes on the phenomenon simultaneously changes one of the constituents on every lower level. Yeah. Now, if an intervention on the phenomenon leads to simultaneous changes in the phenomena and a non-constituent on a specific level, this intervention necessarily also changes at least one constituent on that level in addition to the non-constituent. Horizontally surgical interventions are defined such that they change maximally one behavior on each level simultaneously with the phenomenon. Hence, any intervention on a phenomenon that changes the phenomenon and at the same time a non-constituent cannot be horizontally surgical. The proof is thus a reductio ad absurdum of the negative of the conditional. If there exists a horizontally surgical intervention phi ki with respect to psi causing changes in both phi ki and psi, then phi ki is a constituent of psi. That is, it deduces a contradiction from assuming the truth of the conditional's antecedent, premise 1 below, and the falsehood of its consequent, premise 2 below. Okay, and so they run through the argument here. I will not read this because it basically just says that by definition, the part that if it's horizontally surgical, it's hitting one part at every level for all the levels it hits, and therefore, and since we have a part like complete closure, that means if it's not part of all the part, like it's not one of those parts, it's gonna fail because they defined the we're assuming here to have complete like spatiotemporal subsets of things. So if it says it's a part, it is a part because that's how it was set up. Okay. To explain how the contradiction arises with the aid of illustration, assume for reductio 1 that intervention I phi ki equals little I is a needle pinching the hippocampus of a rat. Why couldn't you do something simpler than this? Alright, say a needle pinching the hippocampus of a rat navigating a water maze changes the hippocampus behavior of generating spatial maps in the rat's brain, psi, as well as the oxygen concentration in some blood vessel of the hippocampus, phi ki, such that the intervention on phi ki with respect to psi is horizontally surgical, and yet that 2 phi ki is not a constituent of psi. By H, it follows that 3, the changes in phi ki and psi are simultaneous. As phi ki does not constitute psi, it follows by UC that some constituent phi hj, some different entity with a different behavior, must simultaneously realize the change on psi on the same level as phi ki, because there must be something on the lower levels. In our example, phi hj can be interpreted as firing some neurons in the hippocampus, since also the changes psi of phi hj and not only the changes of phi ki and psi are simultaneous. It follows by tr that 5 changes in hj and phi ki are simultaneous too. By sim, it follows that the changes in phi ki and hj are not mutually causally related, meaning that they are brought about by a common cause structure. The big I points at both phi hj and phi ki, and not via directed path. Phi ki implies big I, the big intervention does phi ki, which then causes phi hj, or the other way around. That is, neural activity and oxygen concentration are changed by the intervention on separate paths. That in turn entails that 7 big I is equal to little I directly causes 2 behaviors on the same level, specifically phi ki and phi ki hj, which state in 8 contradicts the initial assumption that phi ki is horizontally surgical due to a violation of condition H3. Yeah, because it says it's not, if you add the extra thing in, it says it's only hitting one thing on each level, and so there was extraneous stuff, therefore violation of H3, is H3 somewhere here? I don't know, but whatever, it doesn't matter. You can take the argument's word for it, it's not impossibly complicated. Look, it just says if you've got something else mixed in here, it doesn't work. You can only hit what the structure of the phenomena just gets hit all the way down all at once, not something else. So that way all the levels are hit in the specific way that only relates to the macro level, psi, as it were. Okay. To resolve the contradiction in 8, at least one of the premises has to go, meaning that we must reject one of the principles UC, TR, or SIM. One of the assumptions 1 and 2, we've already defended these things that they said they did. TR is widely accepted in macroscopic and yet not cosmic. Transitivity is widely accepted in the macroscopic yet not cosmic domain of investigation of the special sciences, that is, in the domain where mechanistic explanations are appropriate. Moreover, although the blood vessel's behavior are spatiotemporally contained in the hippocampus map generation, the latter is commonly taken to be constituted by neural activity and not by the oxygen concentration in the blood vessels surrounding the neurons. The oxygen concentration is, if anything, a sterile effect of neural activity. Hence, 2 likewise cannot be rejected. The only viable option, therefore, is to deny 1. Since oxygen concentration is not a constituent, the change in oxygenation cannot possibly simultaneously co-vary with the phenomenon unless the neural activity also simultaneously co-varies with it, meaning that the intervention is not horizontally surgical. The upshot is that if phi ki is not a constitution of psi, then the intervention of big I equals little I on psi ki with respect to phi cannot be horizontally surgical. Since nothing hinges on the intervention being our candidate intervention, the argument generalizes. There does not exist a non-constituent for which there exist horizontally surgical interventions, or contrapositively, all parts for which horizontally surgical interventions exist are constituents. You know, this was a very, expelled out way to just say what the definition was. I'm not entirely in love with this use of logic here. I mean, sometimes I know you have to impress upon people that what you say is really what it means, but I'm not exactly sure what was bought by this whole thing right here. I mean, if, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just why go through, people like this. It's true. People do like seeing the logic underneath things, but I'm not sure in this setting if the logic really matters, because it's a mechanistic explanation. Okay, so you had some principles and you did some logic and you got the result you wanted, but in some sense, it did follow from the definitions. So, okay, that's my that's my curmudgeon-y side there, I guess. There's nothing wrong with anything they said. I'm just grumpy about the rhetoric. It is tempting to build a full-blown interventionist definition of constitution on the fundamental suff by stipulating that, in combination with parthood, sufficiency is not only sufficient but also necessary for constitution. H fat phi ki constitutes psi if and only if the instants of psi ki are spatio-temporal parts of instances of psi. There exists a possible horizontal surgical intervention, big I phi ki equals I on phi ki with respect to psi that causes changes both in phi ki and psi. Okay. Yes, this is the parthood thing here. Spatio-temporal parts. HFAP imposes parthood condition like MM, but replaces top-down and bottom-up manipulations with horizontally surgical interventions. Moreover, HFAT is built in analogy to Woodward's 2003 interventionist definition of causation, which also upgrades a provably sufficient condition for causation, the existence of difference-making scenarios induced by an ideal intervention, to a full-blown definition by stipulating that this condition is not only sufficient but also necessary for causation. However, this feature of interventionalism has given rise to well-known objections, as it is questionable whether ideal interventions indeed exist for every causal dependence. For instance, it is physically impossible to ideally intervene on the moon with respect to the Earth's tides, or on Big Bang with respect to the latter's downstream effects. Discussing the adequacy of interventionist account of causation is beyond the scope of this paper. For current purposes, it suffices to stress that HFAT is subject to the same vulnerabilities insofar as the existence of horizontally surgical interventions depends minimally on the existence of interventions on any putative constituent with respect to spatiotemporally non-overlapping parts of the phenomena under scrutiny. But if the possible existence of such interventions is questionable in causal context, it is of course likewise questionable in other constitutional contexts. Yeah, that's a good question of if there's untestable things, you can't make such a general claim because you don't know, or well, it's just there's a gap in the causal explanation if there's parts of things that we think are mechanical but we'll never be able to test, and so maybe that's the problem. But I don't think, this is not a big problem for them, and they say so. Still, it is important to emphasize that HFAT is not subject to MM's conceptual flaws. While MM defines constitution in terms of interventions that cannot possibly exist, and thus entails the paradoxical conclusion that there cannot possibly exist instances of constitution, HFAT has no such implications. The adequacy of HFAT, just as the adequacy of interventionist definition of causation, is a matter of scope, in that the sense of the definition may be subject to counterexamples, but it does not have any paradoxical ramifications to the effect the existence of instances of the definitions is excluded on a priori grounds. This, we submit, is a welcome step forward for anyone who wants to analyze constitution in terms of some sort of interventions. Okay. Recent literature has shown that the definition of constitution based on the notion of ideal interventions are flawed. If constitution is tied to the possible existence of ideal interventions, either constitution reduces to causation, contrary to the widespread view that constitution is different from causation, or cases of constitution cannot possibly exist because the ideal interventions of phenomena which non-reductively supervene on mechanisms are unrealizable in principle. While several authors have taken these criticisms as motivating non-interventionist analyses of constitution, we further explored the chances of reviving the interventionist project. To this end, we introduced a novel notion of intervention, that is, the notion of horizontal surgical intervention, that we proved provides a sufficient condition for constitution. Furthermore, we argued that if that condition is also taken to be necessary for constitution, a full-blown interventionist definition of constitution results, which is not subject to the conceptual flaws of definition in terms of ideal interventions. Okay, so it took a bunch of fast talking to get through. Too many formulas just for my speaking comfortability, and I'm a little worried about, it's not really a problem in this literature. Everyone kind of talks about different levels, but if you're going to define things in terms of those levels, like you're trying to understand your concepts, I am a tad worried about one behavior, one level talk. How exactly are you selecting? You've got some sort of choice going on, and understanding how exactly the levels are defined and behaviors are selected. And this may not be it's not a critical problem, but other than that, there's a nice paper showing that there is a way to slice the causal sort of descending chain of things. Not causal. There's a descending smaller and smaller chain of things that you can hit all at the same time, and that way, by one intervention, one common cause, fat-handed as it were, that allows you to continually look at the constituents all the way down, even as they all add up to some macro level phenomenon. Okay, so this was well done. And my grumpiness aside, I had that one question, but that's it. So, everyone, thank you for listening. If you're still here, leave me a message if you want me to read something. Everyone stay safe, and I'll be back tomorrow because there's nowhere to go. Have a good night, folks.